The score for How to Train Your Dragon is, in my opinion, one of the best movie scores ever written. I've talked a lot about the development of two themes already on this channel. However, Powell uses and develops several other themes in this score, almost all of which appear in the opening cue, This is Berk, creating a brilliant operatic overture to open the film. I'm considering This is Berk as the time from the very beginning of the film through about 6 minutes in. If you have the original soundtrack from 2010, the music is split into two cues, This is Berk and Dragon Battle. However, in the score, this is contrived as a single cue titled This is Berk, and it is all one track on the deluxe edition soundtrack. Since the score is a single cue, it seems safe to assume composer John Powell thought of these two tracks as one when composing. Now, before looking at the themes, what do I mean by operatic overture? When opera was first invented at the beginning of the 17th century, the idea of an overture was no more than a piece of music to signal the performance was about to start. The music did not use themes or ideas from parts of the opera. Instead, the overture was just a standalone work. This idea continued with the concert overture. Think Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture, for instance, which is just a standalone work, not the introduction to a longer dramatic work. By the time of Mozart in the late 18th century, composers were beginning to integrate the opera overture into the rest of the opera, using it to introduce key themes. Mozart's overture to The Marriage of Figaro is a good example of this. However, not every part of the overture was necessarily a theme that would be heard later. Imagine my disappointment when I sat through an entire production of Rossini's William Tell overture, only to find that the Lone Ranger theme never occurs anywhere outside of the opening. The late 19th century operetta or light opera was where the overture really became a means of introducing important themes. This continued into musical theater. If you're a fan of musical theater, you've probably noticed that the opening instrumental cue, before the action on stage even starts, normally includes a lot of the memorable themes that are used later in the show. Powell mentions in interviews how the directors of How to Train Your Dragon wanted a big thematic score, so he may have had the idea of a big theatrical overture in mind when writing This is Berk. Like an overture, Powell uses the opening musical cue to introduce most of the main themes in the film to you, the viewer. This isn't quite the same as an overture, the biggest difference being we're not staring at a drawn curtain or blank screen during this overture. The action has already started. Although the opening scene is very introductory, introducing you to the main characters, location, and major struggle of the film. In this way, the whole opening cue serves as a bit of an overture of what is to come. And Powell uses this storytelling to add his own storytelling, drawing associations between filmic elements and his plethora of leitmotifs at the same time. So, what are those leitmotifs or recurring themes that Powell introduces in This is Berk? And moreover, how does he set up their associations in this cue to enhance the musical storytelling throughout the film? If you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know I've talked about the very beginning of This is Berk before. The very first music in the film is the first two motives of the Truth theme. The third and fourth motives follow after a brief introduction of another theme, giving us the full theme just introduced in chunks. Here is that introduction. For more on why I call this theme the Truth theme instead of Hiccup's theme or Flying theme or any other name floating around the internet, you can check out this video here. Okay, enough rehashing. Let's look at something new. What follows the Truth theme are three themes that are all related to different aspects of the Vikings and their battles. As the DreamWorks logo fades away and Hiccup's voiceover enters, there is a slowed-down version of what the score calls the fun Viking theme. I've referred to this theme as opening battle theme before.
This is Berk.
When tracing it through the film, it is often used when the Vikings are fighting dragons, but not always. For instance, it occurs here.
Toothless! What is wrong with you? Bad dragon! He's not usually like this. Oh no.
Is Astrid having fun here? I don't know, but I feel like fun Viking theme encompasses a little more of the theme's uses than simply battle theme. This theme is normally in 6/8 with a lilting Celtic jig feel to it. Here's the theme at tempo in This Is Berk. The theme normally appears in octaves throughout the score. Without any form of harmonization, it is difficult to establish a tonality. What is clear is that the tune is modal, not your standard major or minor, and could be described as either Dorian or Mixolydian, which points to the Celtic influence, as many Celtic folk tunes are either in Dorian or Mixolydian. In this first full-tempo instance of This Is Berk, the tonic seems to be B-flat, as the tune ends with resounding finality on that pitch. The published score says it's in the Dorian mode, which is a fair assessment. However, an argument could be made for Mixolydian, since both a D and D-flat are used. It really depends on which note the analyst decides is an accidental and which is part of the mode. Again, since there's no harmonies here to back up the mode, it's hard to really say. Here are the scales of B-flat Dorian and B-flat Mixolydian, so you can visualize how the tune could be analyzed in either mode. The modal context and jig-like rhythms and time signature establish a Celtic feel to the Viking world right off the bat in this opening cue. However accurate that is, it fits with the Scottish accents of the adult Vikings. It's a catchy tune, and the viewer is likely to remember it for when it appears later in the movie. The fun Viking theme is often paired with the next theme in This Is Berk, which the score calls Warring Viking Theme. This theme often plays when the Vikings are actively fighting dragons, or discussing taking down dragons, or any other instance relating to being a Viking that fights dragons, hence the name Warring Viking. This theme feels and sounds a lot more serious than the fun Viking theme, creating a nice contrasting tone. Although some of the Vikings certainly enjoy the thrill of fighting dragons, pairing these themes together captures that idea while adding more depth and seriousness at the same time. However fun the fighting may be, as Hiccup mentions in his voiceover, it results in lots and lots of new houses. Here's what that theme sounds like. In this first instance, the theme is given to the low instruments of the orchestra, trombones, bassoons, cellos, etc. The remaining instruments keep the motion going with continuous triplets as the battle continues raging. However, this slower theme adds a steady sort of feel to the opening. It seems broad, strong, and manly, if you will, befitting the beefy, bearded Vikings that make up the majority of the fighters. There's an emphasis on the note E-flat throughout this first instance of the theme, and like the fun Viking theme, it seems like we're dealing with some kind of modality, most likely E-flat Dorian, although the absence of a chord progression again makes it hard to determine mode. This sort of playing with unclear modalities adds to the chaos of the opening battle. This theme also establishes the strength of the Vikings throughout the rest of the movie, introduced brilliantly here in this overture as a contrast to the fun Viking theme. The next theme is just called Vikings. There's a sketch of this theme by Powell at the beginning of the score with the written word Vikings on it, so I really can't argue with that name. The theme normally appears in pieces, but the whole thing is found in the Vikings Have Their Tea track on the soundtrack album. Here's what the theme looks and sounds like there. the theme seems to represent yet another side of the Vikings, showing them as well-rounded individuals despite their tendency for battle. Here the theme is used in the context of a battle, but it is also used in gentler contexts throughout the film, such as when Gobber is telling Stoic, "You can only prepare him," when they're arguing about putting Hiccup in dragon training, or when Astrid tells Hiccup he was the first Viking to ride a dragon. Really, this theme seems to represent the idea of what it means to be a Viking, and how that changes with Hiccup's journey. This is something that could warrant a whole video in and of itself, so I won't get into any more of that here. There are actually two versions of this theme. We'll go ahead and just call them major and minor. And we find both in This Is Berk. The first instance is the minor version, which introduces Stoic. As Hiccup describes Stoic the Vast, the music seems to point to him as the quintessential Viking. He's the leader of the village, he's strong, fearless, and he ripped a dragon's head off when he was just a baby. And here is what that theme looks and sounds like in this context.
What are you doing
In contrast, the theme appears in its major version, that is the version in the Vikings Have Their Tea track, when Gobber stops Hiccup from trying to leave the forge and fight dragons. Hiccup is the opposite of the ideal Viking. He's small and weak, he can't lift a hammer or throw a weapon, he is good at tinkering, but tinkering alone doesn't kill dragons, or so they think. Hiccup is of course Stoic's son, but the film hasn't told us that yet. The use of a different version of the same theme here connects these two characters with their blood relation, yet serves to showcase how polar opposite they are from each other. And here is the theme in that context.
Oh, come on, let me out, please. I need to make my mark.
Oh, you made plenty of marks, all in the wrong places.
Please, 2 minutes. I'll kill a dragon. My life will get infinitely better. I might even get a date.
Truly, this Viking theme excites me almost as much as the truth and friendship themes, so you can expect a full video of this theme someday. But here, in the context of the opening overture, just know that it sets up the contrast of what a true Viking is and should be, and Powell will continue to develop it throughout the film as the thoughts of what represents a true Viking change. After the Vikings minor and another iteration of the fun Viking theme, we find what I decided to call the Viking Variation, more so because of how it functions like the war theme than how it is musically related to the war theme. And this is what it looks and sounds like.
For their taste, they would know what to do with all this.
Well, they need toothpicks, don't they?
In defense of this as a variation of the warring Viking theme, both themes do have a minor third to major second upwards motion going on, which might be why they sound so similar to me. I'm adding to this analysis after looking at it again. So basically, in looking at these two themes again, they start the same. So you have these two long notes followed by a triplet. There is a rest in the War Viking theme, but you can imagine it would be the same note as the last note in the triplet, and then it would actually match the variation exactly. So this variation seems to be a simplification of the Warring Viking theme, and instead of going into the rest of the theme, it instead repeats in a sort of sequential pattern moving up from where it started instead of going into the more complicated theme. And now back to the script. How do you decide if something is a variation? Well, unless the composer tells you, it is subjective to some extent. More so than musical relations, the subtext might play into an argument for this as a variation, since most contexts relate to Vikings fighting, like the Warring Viking theme.
For another thing, noise! Make lots of it to throw off a dragon's aim! Here! Oh no!
What do you want me to do? Block out the sun? I can do that, and I don't have time.
At first, it seemed to me that this variation might represent specifically Viking incompetence, as the first time it is used is when Hiccup is saying they wouldn't know what to do with all this to Gobber. Although to be fair, just a few minutes of screen time later, Hiccup successfully shoots down a Night Fury. And also the other time it's used in this opening cue, it does not point to incompetence as it plays when Gobber heads out to fight.
On the ball, Hiccup. They need tea out there. Stay.
This theme is conspicuously absent from the list of themes in the opening to the published score, which is another reason I thought it fitting to think of it as a variation. Whether it's a variation of the warring Viking theme or a standalone theme, it seems to also represent the idea of Vikings fighting dragons. The next theme in this cue is the Romantic theme, which I have previously called Astrid's theme. Romantic is the name used in the score, and it is more related to specifically Hiccup and Astrid's relationship than just to Astrid, so this naming of Romantic makes more sense. This theme is rarely used and is recognized as the main melody during the romantic flight scene. Here's just a bit of what it sounds like. In This Is Berk, we get the opening of the theme when Hiccup turns a lovesick gaze on Astrid, who is flanked by a fiery explosion. Here the theme in this overture very obviously foreshadows the reconciliation and romantic relationship to come between these two characters. It is a break in the action as the continuous triplet motion pauses. The only motion here is now eighth notes in the violas, to give us a moment of reprieve in the battle and emphasize our protagonist has a really big crush on this girl. And that takes us to the end of the This Is Berk track on the soundtrack. However, as I mentioned previously, the track called Dragon Battle on the soundtrack is written as a continuation of This Is Berk in the score. And when including that as part of this operatic overture, we get the introduction of one more theme. This one is called the Dragon Tune by the score. I'll just call it Dragons for short. This is another theme that could warrant, and probably will, its own video of how it develops and enhances the film story. In This Is Berk, the theme is presented when Hiccup introduces the different breeds of dragons attacking the village. Rare for Powell, at least in this score, in this first introduction of this longer theme, we get the whole thing uninterrupted. We actually get it twice uninterrupted. The theme appears in this cue in low voices, as it normally does in the score, which seems to emphasize the size of the dragons and the dragons as the main antagonist, as low voices are often used for villain themes. As the theme progresses, it feels more agitated in a way. It opens on a whole note tied to a dotted quarter, but there are progressively shorter rhythms in a sense. Note how the sixteenths are coming closer together, and then as it continues into this second part, we see eighth notes as well, and less longer notes. There's also a sort of sequential thing going on, although not quite, and the notes almost get stuck repeating, which seems to add to the agitation. And here's what the theme sounds like.
And be sure to get the English noticed. Broncos are tough. Taking down one of those would definitely get a girlfriend. Simple back. Exotic. Two heads. Twice the status. They're fighting the sheep! Concentrate fire on the Lord Bank! Then there's the monstrous thing. Only the nice Vikings go after those. They have this nasty habit of setting themselves on fire.
The theme returns again after a short break, when Hiccup is running out of the forge with his catapult machine. The theme is slightly different here. The first two times the theme occurred was a sort of minor version, and here we have a sort of major version, for the sake of the number of major intervals involved, not necessarily key signature. It sounds a little more hopeful, which fits Hiccup's determination to go kill a dragon, despite the ferocity of the description of the dragons with the earlier version. And here is that different version of the theme. So those are all of the themes present in the This Is Berk Overture. The only two recurring themes that are missing are the friendship theme, which I've already talked about a lot on this channel. It's this one. And also this one. And this one.
Night Fury. Speed unknown. Size unknown.
By leaving this theme out of the overture, Powell reserves its first entrance for when Hiccup and Toothless meet face to face. And it seems like even in its minor version, it might be a little hard to fit into this cue. For more on that theme, check out this video. The other missing theme is called the Fate theme by the score. This theme is used sparingly in the film, but relates to Hiccup's fate of turning the village around in a sense. The most apparent moment is when Hiccup is making the tail for Toothless. That's actually the first time it's used in the score, at least that I found. It's a pivotal moment to introduce a new theme, which is possibly why Powell left it out of the overture. Powell uses the opening cue of How to Train Your Dragon as an excuse to introduce all but two major themes from the rest of the film. In this way, he treats the opening cue like a sort of overture, and uses the context within the lengthy scene to start developing associations between the music and major ideas of the film. Not only does this set up the rest of the score for development, but in treating this cue like an overture, Powell adds to the big thematic score the directors wanted for the film, capturing the idea of older thematic productions, such as opera or musical theater. I hope you enjoyed this walk through most of the major themes in How to Train Your Dragon, and how they are introduced in the opening cue. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for future videos. If you're new here and love How to Train Your Dragon, be sure to check out this playlist here that has my other How to Train Your Dragon videos. As always, thank you all so much for watching.